Welcome to the 2000 Cubit Rule. I am your host, Mark Rowan, and I'm also the founder of Sheep Feast. And while I have your attention about Sheep Feast, I want to make sure you understand a little bit about the Metamorpho method. We're going to be rolling more and more of that out in the future, but it's based on Habakkuk 2:2, and it's this idea of understanding what the message is that God has given you and how you can have the most impact through that. So it's 5 steps. Write the vision down, make it plain on tablets so that those that read it can run with it. So get a little of a tease of maybe the different stages of what that looks like. So if you're having a message in your hands and you're wanting to get better at how that gets disseminated and put out there for the world to hear, come talk to us. We'd love to see if we can help. Well, that's a little bit about us, a little bit about our next guest. We're excited to have Nicholas Hunter with us. And so, Turnabout is Fair Play. I was on his podcast. And so, here we
Yeah,
go. He's on mine.
there
And
we go.
so, that's exciting. Nicholas, I got a cool bio for you. You're a husband, a father, and a follower of Jesus, and you're executive coach who helps Christian entrepreneurs succeed in their relationships as much as they do at their jobs. And you live with your wife and kids, 3 kids in Cincinnati, Ohio. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Thank you, Mark. And yeah, that said it well. That sums it up well, what I do. So I'm excited for this conversation today.
Yes, sir. So we always want to kind of get the story behind the man or woman that we're talking with. And so we kind of want to get your journey. You have a day job per se, but then you're also in the coaching space. And we were just
Right.
chatting before we hit record, and you're like, got a lot of irons in the fire. So we kind of want to get that journey. What does it look like to go from um, whatever you started as, an embryo,
Right.
and then get all the way to having your own practice and coaching folks and all that sort of thing?
Yeah. No, that's great. And you know, my day job, so to speak, is not so drastically different from the coaching gig, which is kind of what I'm getting into. But basically, my background is a being a therapist, and so I'm a counselor by trade. Started a private counseling practice in 2020, so kind of in the thick of COVID. So did a lot of telehealth, and you know, as a lot of people can confirm, COVID, let's just say it created a lot of counseling opportunities, if we were to look at it that way. Just, yeah, a lot of people dealing with anxiety and depression, you know, from that. And people still reference that to this day in sessions, you know, like back in 2020. So yeah, that's the full-time gig is being a counselor, and I've kind of grown the practice to now we have 7 therapists working here, including myself. And a couple years ago, it was just kind of on my heart to branch off and do something a little different. So very similar in terms of walking with clients, helping them get a transformation, but the coaching venture is a little more niche, with focusing on Christian entrepreneurs. And it's also a little more, you can get a little more out of the box. There's not as much regulations and structure and things that are in the counseling world. And so coaching just kind of opens up some new fun opportunities. And yeah, so that's kind of still in the baby stages, trying to get, you know, towards the toddler stages here in terms of the coaching, while also managing the counseling practice and stopping myself from starting too many other businesses because, you know, it's about once a month where I come across an idea that I'm like, oh, maybe I should do this too, and gotta kind of got to reel it back and say, take a breath, Nick, take a breath. So, yeah, so I can go into some of those other ones at some point too, but the main thing is counselor by day, coach by later day.
Yeah. Time management is key here in your
Exactly.
journey between these doing these different things. And so a little bit more on the background. So, like I said, did you grow up in a Christian home? And also, did you always kind of have a pull towards this idea that of being a counselor, or when did that kind of awaken inside of you?
Yeah, I did grow up in a Christian home, amazing parents. They're still married to this day, going on 40 something years. And so very kind of, inspiring growing up and going to church. And youth group was really impactful for me in my teenage years. That's where my relationship with Jesus became more real, and a lot of amazing experiences like at summer camp and then the weekly meetings. And then that kind of bled into going to college, getting involved with, I was kind of, this is sort of a theme in my life you'll see in terms of like a lot of irons in the fire, but I got involved in Navigators in college, but I was also involved in Campus Crusade. And then there were other ministries that I would kind of pop into. And, if you're offering a free meal, that gets me there. And so I'd be like, all right, let me hit up the Baptist Student Union. Oh, then there's the Methodists over there hosting a lunch. And so, uh, um, but in terms of the counseling poll, it's been under the surface for a while. I've always kind of been drawn towards people and kind of, I guess you could say, naturally empathetic. Like I'm a high feeler, so I would, if I saw the kid in the corner who looked lonely and sad, I would feel for them. And if I had the courage, go up and say hi or help them out. And um, after college, I did a couple years at kind of like a ministry training school, not like a seminary, but it's more like a lifestyle ministry program. Um, and they had a counseling kind of focus that you could choose your focus, and I chose that counseling focus. And so that was 2014, so that's a good 12 years ago. But it wasn't until about 2018 that I went back to grad school to actually, get the license, become a therapist. And then it's 2024 or so that where it kind of the calling kind of felt more refined in terms of like, hey, I want to go deeper with my ideal client. I want faith to be at the forefront. I want to be kind of just unashamed about that. Not that I'm ashamed, working with maybe secular or atheist clients, but obviously it's not as much part of the counseling journey if they don't want it to be. I don't force it on anyone. But with coaching, I can kind of just name it from the front and say, if you're a Christian entrepreneur, founder, husband, father, to get even more kind of niche,
Mm.
that's really my ideal client that I just love working with.
Right. When your journey, once again, there's the, hey, I'm in this ministry like school and it's got a counseling, and then eventually you make that kind of like the next level of formality by getting the degree. Now, to me, I'm looking at this and this is you're launching in 2020. I look at it the providence of God, like probably in your lifetime, my lifetime, I'm a few days at least older than you. Uh, Probably the idea of mental health and counseling has never been more up in the forefront than any other time, probably maybe in the history of mankind. And
Sure.
so, and that moment was very pivotal in like, hey, this is a big issue that needs to be addressed. So it's not just happenstance, right? There was like the
Right.
hand of God is guiding you, and of course, many others to help
Yeah.
in this area. And it makes me think of some different things. Our church has as your soul prospers is the theme of the year from that scripture. I wish,
Yeah.
brethren, that you would prosper as your soul prospers. So this idea that everything flows out of the issues of the heart, I think
Yeah.
is a big deal. And so, how did you kind of um, navigate that as where you're like, oh yeah, I feel like God's going to have this big opportunity for me, or just like, hey, it's a little step here, a little step there, and then in the middle, find yourself in the middle of all of it.
Yeah. That's a great question. And, speaking to kind of the power of coaching, the way I actually decided upon going back to grad school to get the degree and pursue that route was actually through a group coaching experience. It was like a 10 or 12 week program with like 30 other people where we took personality tests, we had like live teachings, we did breakouts, we did all of these things to kind of explore
Mm.
who are you? Why are you here? What are you made for? Kind of that deeper purpose. And by the end of that 10 or 12 weeks, I had narrowed it down to two things. I was either going to go and become a high school teacher or a therapist. And it's interesting because now that I'm getting more into coaching, there is a little more of a teaching aspect in coaching. And so I kind of get to, enjoy because I do love teaching. That's part of it. And, in therapy, you kind of lay off of that. You don't want to be too teachy with clients. You're making space for them. You're validating, and there is teaching, but at that point in time, I wasn't sure which one to do. And ultimately, I decided, well, as a counselor, I have the chance to go deeper, have a little more personal impact with somebody sitting there in the room. And so I chose that route. And it is cool just how, it's kind of come full circle with now that I'm getting more into coaching. I'm trying to create more content and just be able to teach people. Like, uh, I think there's a lot of things out there that are simpler than people realize, but we feel like they're complex. And I think personal growth is one of those things where you may hear 1,000 different tips or pieces of advice on, how to grow as a person and be a better version of you. But at the end of the day, it's simpler than it seems. It takes a lot of consistency and it takes typically some accountability. And I'll be the first to say that like accountability is greatly needed in anything that I do because my brain is just going a million different places. And so what I like to do and what I see teaching allows me to do is take something that seems complex and break it down into, using a metaphor or a framework or something that just makes it more simple. So that's what I love incorporating into my coaching.
That's a wonderful to just think about all those different things. And the thing that's coming to mind as you referenced a couple times about having a lot of irons in the fire and
Yeah.
a lot of things going on, a lot of ideas, right?
Yeah.
The concept of a good idea versus a God idea, right?
Mm,
There are things that we can spend our time, can choose to do all different things, and we have that free will, right?
yeah.
But there are things I believe that God puts in our lap that, for me, it's one of those things is sheep feast because I've
Yeah.
laid it down many times through the years, but it never
Mhm.
really goes away. And so then I'm like, all right, God, you must be pushing this forward on some level, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so for you, like you said, you have different business ideas and all that, and of course we can all, uh, have more than one thing to be involved with our life. But for
Sure.
you, what's your process in this? Hey, this seems like a pretty cool thing. It honors God, at least it seems like it. But is this what God is actually breathing on? What's that look like for you?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, well, I wish I could say it was this streamlined process that I've gotten nailed down over many years. A lot of it is still, like I said earlier, kind of reining myself back, like no, Nick, don't
Mhm.
start another business at 11 p.m. Just go to sleep instead. Um, but one thing I would say is just the value of mentors and friends, basically community. So the value of getting outside input because just me in my own head, my brain is like, yes, go for it. Do it. Just take the leap. You've got this, and sometimes that's great, having kind of that confidence or optimism. I've always like leaned optimistic. But it can get you into some situations where you're in over your head and again that can be good too when it's like a step of faith, but I like the way you phrase that question about, is this a good idea or a God idea? And so with the coaching specifically, about a year and a half ago, I I was ready. I was chomping at the bit, ready to launch the coaching wing, kind of as I saw it, of my practice. And I was talking, processing with a buddy of mine, going back and forth. He was asking me some questions, and ultimately he said, "Hey, I feel like maybe you should invest more into the foundation of your counseling practice before launching the coaching." Because at the time, the counseling practice, there were so many fires to put out constantly. It was a giant headache. And I was just ready to do something different. But he was like, maybe you should invest more in the foundation. And then literally maybe 2 days later, maybe not even that long, another friend of mine who lives in a different state had no idea about what I was thinking or this conversation I'd had with a friend was he's someone who just kind of regularly prays for me in my business, which is something I reached out for years ago, a group of people, and I just said, "Hey, could you guys pray for my business, like in me, like maybe set a reminder in your phone, whether it's once a week, once a month, whatever." Um, and I can't remember whether that was my wife's idea, but that's a great idea. Have people pray for you. Um, he said, he said, "Hey, I just got the sense like that God was saying, um, something about like investing in like." The Peace Well, which is my counseling practice, and like something about like the foundations or like investing. And he basically just mirrored what the other guy had said exactly. And so that was very impactful because I was like, okay, God, all right,
Yeah.
maybe you're telling me to slow down a bit and invest more. And so I said that was about a year and a half ago. Over the next about a year, I hired a couple more people in my practice and I got some more kind of systems in place just to help us like be healthier. Um, and then I ended up launching officially the counseling practice this past November or so. Um, so that's kind of one example of just like it could have happened a year and a half ago. I was ready for it to happen by kind of listening to the wisdom of some friends who were also trying to listen to God. I decided, all right, slow down, wait, and now I kind of feel more of the green light, and so now I'm running hard after it.
Yeah. We're talking about Proverbs 15:22. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. So
There you
it's in
go.
the Bible, kids. And if you read it,
Right.
we can figure these things out. And
Yeah.
that's the heart of the podcast, right? 2000 Cubit rule. We're making room for God to move. So
Yeah.
for those that are tuning in on the regular, you would know that it's in Joshua 3:4. So go read that too. But just the idea that sometimes it's going to look like, or a lot of times, going to some trusted advisors, counselors to get some other insight because we all have Holy Spirit that can help us understand God's will.
Yeah.
And not that the Bible obviously gives us the God's will on the regular basis, but the Bible doesn't say you should, whether or not you should open up a coaching practice alongside your
Exactly.
counseling. So that's when we need to make
Exactly.
room. And
Yeah.
while we're talking about the podcast, hey, if you're watching this, like, share, subscribe, do all those things because we need people to hear what Nick's talking about. So do that as well. And
Yeah.
so along your journey that we've been talking about, you get the coaching practice up and running. You're starting to do that. And there is help me understand, is the primal question framework a part of your coaching what you do?
Yes.
Okay, so let's
Yes.
dive into that because it sounds pretty nitty-gritty. The primal question.
Yeah.
So let us know more about that.
Right. So I mentioned before that I love simplifying things. I just like that's just like kind of a core value for mine. And part of it is just life is crazy, right? The world is kind of a crazy place. There's a lot going on, and that has never been more true than now because every year it just seems like more things happen, more technologies come out vying for our attention. And so I love simple. So I had been following this guy named Mike Foster, who is also a licensed therapist who has shifted into coaching. So he's kind of like mirrored my kind of career trajectory, though he's a few years ahead. And he used to have a podcast called Fun Therapy, where he would bring guests on, some of them like kind of well-known people, like people who had led movements or led companies, and they would agree to basically do a counseling session on the podcast and have that, put out there for the whole world to see. So pretty vulnerable thing. Um, but he was just always a great host, loved his style, felt like I connected with him a lot and saw him almost like a mentor from afar. And then one day I went to go like listen to his podcast and I saw it wasn't called Fun Therapy anymore. He had changed the title to the Primal Question. And I was like, is this the same guy? Like, what happened here? And so I started looking into it. Turns out he had been for kind of years researching and developing this model because he also had a desire for simplicity. And uh, it has a similar feel to the Enneagram, but in my opinion, it's just a lot more straightforward, simple, relatable. It has seven results instead of the nine from the Enneagram, but each result is a question. So he has seven different questions, and what these represent are core emotional needs that humans have. And we all have them all. We all have all of these needs, but typically one of them rises to the surface. So typically, some point in your life, um, you received like a no to one of these questions. Because the questions are like, am I safe?
Mhm.
Am I loved? Am I good enough? Those are just three of the seven. So these are questions that either have a yes or no answer. And when you get a yes, you feel great. You're like, yes, I'm safe. Yes, I'm loved. Yes, I'm wanted or good enough or any of those. When you get a no or even a maybe, right? Because a maybe is also not that great. Like, am I safe? Maybe. Whoa, that
Mhm.
doesn't feel good. Like, am I good enough? Maybe. If you get a no or a maybe, you start to go into what he calls the scramble, which is where you make it a high priority to get a yes to that question. And some people do that in unhealthy ways. They try to force a yes to the question. And so, there's I mean, we could talk for hours on it. Obviously, any of these models, you can just keep going deeper and deeper, but just the kind of simple surface level description is every human on the planet has one of these questions that has kind of risen to the top, or some might have a few that kind of have gone to the top. And we're just living our lives asking this question. And if your spouse or one of your kids or a friend answers that question with a no in some way, that can send you into a scramble and all sorts of behaviors can come out that you might be like, why did I do that? And the answer is because you were trying to get the yes to that question. So yeah, that's a core framework that I use in my coaching is helping people discover their primal question, which you can take the free online assessment at his website, primalquestion.com. But it really takes some kind of feeling around to really make sure it resonates. And then, of course, what do we do with it? How do we navigate life knowing that we have this question?
Yeah, that's fascinating. We know it's probably right because it's seven, and the Bible uses seven a lot, so
There you go.
it's
There you go.
automatically better than Enneagram. Don't
Right.
tell my wife I said that. Um, she's always
Yeah.
like, "You're an Enneagram." Well, I don't know. I take these personality tests, and I'm usually like all over the board because I'm not one of those peak guys that peaks out in
Yep.
one area a whole lot.
Yep.
But
I'm
anyway,
the same. I'm the same. Yeah. And the Enneagram is still great. And the guy, Mike Foster, even references it sometimes in his teaching and things like that. But he just saw a need for a simpler model that's just a little more straightforward. Like, if someone says, "Hey, you're an Enneagram 9," well, you got to kind of go look that up. Like, what does that mean? Like, what are all the intricacies? But if someone says, "Hey, like, I think your primal question is, am I safe?" You can kind of instantly know, like, oh, does that resonate? Like,
Mm,
oh yeah, like no wonder I, check to make sure my doors are locked twice before going to bed, or no wonder I don't do any, play any sports or things like that. It might come out in terms of just that primal question.
yeah. So what's your primal question?
So that's a great question. My primal question is, am I good enough?
All
And
right.
so that, yeah, there are things that can happen in life that kind of poke that. And, like I said, this uh, coaching venture is still kind of in its early stages. And so there's plenty of times where I myself am thinking like, man, like doesn't seem like I'm getting a lot of engagement on this post, or oh, that person gave me an unfavorable response, or like I don't have enough clients, and that can get directly to the am I good enough?
Mm, yeah.
And so, but the thing is, when you're aware of your primal question and aware that you might be getting triggered in that way, it can at least create the opportunity to have that question answered in other healthier ways.
Mm,
And from a faith perspective, which this guy is a Christian who came up with it, a clear way to get your question answered is straight from God himself, because he answers all of these questions with a yes. You are
mm,
safe,
yeah.
you are loved, you are wanted, you are good enough.
Right.
But you can also, if in a marriage, if both people are aware of this framework, they can help answer each other's question with a yes. Like that should be a goal for every couple. If you know your partner's primal question, you should try and answer it with a yes as much as possible,
Yeah.
because that's going to help them thrive. And then there's also an element of kind of self-leadership in this whole framework, where
Right.
you can rest in, I am good enough.
Yeah.
Okay, I am good enough. All right, brain, I am good enough. And just kind of lead yourself rather than needing everyone in your life to answer that with a yes
Yeah.
so that you can be okay. And so, yeah, so that's all part of my journey is
Yeah.
is still unpacking that and still trying to grow in that area.
Yeah, that last part you were saying about trying to get everybody else to fulfill that. We had a speaker at our church recently that was kind of going right at that. Like, whether it's our spouse or not to say we don't do what you just encouraged, like we know what our
Right.
spouse needs and help, but
Right.
from us, from our perspective, we should not be looking to them as our primary source for validation or
Right.
love. It's this vertical connection with Jesus that's where that is fulfilled. And
Yeah,
everything else flows out of that. Those are like bonus points when we get
exactly.
the confirmation validation from others. And
Yeah.
another language that I've heard used many times is, identifying what's the lie and then
Mhm.
replacing that with a truth. So that kind of plays into what you're just saying with these primal questions, because the enemy is going to come in and he's going to whisper, especially he's going to know that, oh, this guy reacts, in a
Yeah.
negative space when it comes to this particular thing. Let me see
Right.
if I can get that reinforced as opposed to what the real truth is.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you can be walking either in that, and he actually calls it the primal truth when you kind of switch the wording around and say, I am fill in the blank. And you're absolutely right. It's, we are tempted to believe the lie, which is that like no, I'm not safe. No, I'm not wanted. No, I'm not good enough. Um, and that's not to say that there aren't situations in life where you truly aren't safe, like physically, of course those exist, but in terms of a whole life lens, like I call it whole life systems coaching. That's kind of the sphere that I'm in is like, hey, let's help people with your whole life framework, instead of just kind of siloed off in these various areas. And so, yeah, absolutely. When you can stand in truth for some of these areas, it just launches you forward and takes away so many of the obstacles that keep people stuck.
You're working with Christian entrepreneurs. They come to you and like, hey,
Right.
Nick seems like he knows what he's talking about, and I
Sure.
need help. And so let's role play that in a little way. So someone
Yeah.
comes to engage. Is the primal question kind of where you start, or is there another thing that you do, like when you sit down and start to do this um,
Yeah.
coaching side of what you do?
Right. Right. Yeah. So it sort of depends on how they find me, I guess. So recently, what I developed was, or I should say is, because it's live, is what I call a whole life system blueprint. And I just use that word. I feel like blueprint kind of, resonates with men, like, yeah, let's build something, blueprints. All right. And it's basically like taking a quiz on my website. How are you doing in these various areas? How is your physical health? How is your mental health, spiritual health, etc. And it basically gives guys just an honest snapshot, because there's no reason to lie on the quiz. It's for your own good. So just be honest, and then it gives you a snapshot of where your life is. And it also gives you some easy next steps. Because like I said, I like simple. So I don't want, to say like, all right, all you need to do is just sleep better, eat better, spend more time with God, spend more time with your wife, and just give like a huge laundry list of things to do. I want to say like, oh, okay, you're really struggling getting a full night's sleep. Could you try and pick a time and set an alarm on your phone that tells you stop what you're doing, wrap it up and head to bed for the night. That's like one simple thing that guys can do. And so reason why I frame it this way is if guys take that quiz and then they already have the blueprint, we can use that as a starting point as well, to kind of launch them into their coaching. So what I'll help them do is just really have those easy daily steps, those wins that they can get and be like, all right, I've got momentum. If it was a movement goal, it's like, hey, can you go on a 5-minute walk? Something like that. Like we start small so that we can gain momentum. Now, the primal question absolutely comes in very early. So if not that first session, probably session number two, in terms of just like, all right, let's get down to it and see what your primal question is, because guys might be running into roadblocks, in their self-care kind of plan, in their blueprint. They might be hitting a roadblock because of their primal question, and something might be holding them back. And so we search through that. And um, I also really like to sit down and do kind of a life timeline, because our story causes, so much of who we are today. And so we look at it through the lens of the primal question, but we look at past, present, future. And being a therapist, it's kind of natural for me to go back into the past and kind of work through things. So that's where that's helpful. And then coaching is more so present, future focused, but we wrap the primal question in there, and also this blueprint of their life systems to sustain it. Because my goal for any of my clients would be that after we're done working together, they feel like they're cruising, like, man, I feel like I'm in step, I'm in rhythm, I'm ready to go. And sure, something might happen again later in life and they might need to check back in again, but by and large, I'd love to equip men with the systems that they need to sustain all of the transformation that happened in our coaching time. And so I'd love, I'm fine if they never reach back out for more coaching again. It's just like, hey, here's your system, go take it, run with it. Of course, I'm here if something happens, which often life does throw things at us like that.
100%. So the last couple of years of my life were a significant season of, understanding my heart, right? The soul prospering and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
business people, well, it could be anybody, but we're talking about Christian entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
They're called to be in the marketplace and influence in that way. And, it's just like every sphere of society, it has its own challenges and whatnot. But there's a lot of people that can be very gifted in certain things, and things
Hmm.
may look like everything's going well, but there could still be these things in their heart that when they run into those questions or challenges, they could really throw up a real roadblock. And so, as a Christian business person, I think there's a real need for people to understand these type of things to make sure that their soul is prospering, because essentially that, when you think about that particular scripture is like you prosper as your soul prospers. So if there is a
Yeah.
weakness there in some area,
Yeah.
you're not going to get to the full effect of what God's ultimate plan is for our lives. And
Right.
he's not going to force these things on us, right? He's going to gently come in and a lot of times the challenges we face are those moments to address. Like, okay, and that's been my story, right? There was a significant season a couple years ago that really was a crucible of sorts. And it was
Yeah.
actually right after I had this 2000 cubit rule kind of revelation. So it
Mm.
was this thing that God was like, hey, you need to start making room for me, because what you're about to walk through is going to be very difficult. And it was a moment of
Wow.
time that really surfaced things that needed to be addressed. And so this is
Mm.
what you're doing, right? You're helping people find this, and hopefully they don't get to the end of their rope and they're just like drowning before they,
Yeah.
find these things out and understand what these questions
Yeah.
are. And so
Absolutely.
for these kind of, let's say it's someone that comes through the door and they have, since you're familiar with it, like, I'm not good enough. What is
Sure.
that journey like for someone that's been struggling with that? How are some things that, or what are some things that you're helping people when they come and sit down or Zoom with you and start having these
Yeah.
conversations?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that you really described that well. That is what I do. And we're one person, and we might be a father, a husband, a business owner, um, a brother, a son, all of these different roles in life, a pastor, but we're one person. And so one area of our life is going to bleed into the others. And often, I describe what I do as executive coaching, but it's where it differs from typical executive coaching is that most executive coaching focuses on the executive in the executive environment. And that means, we're going to help you grow your company. We're going to help you lead your team better. We're going to help you be a better leader, et cetera, which is great. We need that. What I focus on is the executive or, fill in the blank, entrepreneur, businessman, but in the personal environment. So more so in their relationships, because it's just too familiar of a story and such a sad story when you've got a guy who ends up being pretty successful in the business world, but marriage falls apart, or kids never see him, or loses contact with other family members, or drama all around, just all of these things. And sometimes that's at no fault of their own. Some of it's unavoidable, but as far as we're concerned, there are ways to avoid that, to avoid those crashes, and to set up your life in a way. The way I like to describe it is put systems in your life that are pulling you towards your goals so that the systems are like this gravitational pull towards where you want to be rather than feeling like I gotta push, I gotta just grind harder, I just gotta, make it happen. So for someone who struggles with the question of, am I good enough? Number one, again, we'd go through the timeline. We'd go through life. And from this guy's research, he actually could pinpoint that for most people, their primal question is solidified around age 9 or 10. So for anyone listening, if you think back to age 9 or 10, of course, it's not going to be for everyone, but for most people, just think about what maybe you wished you could have heard from your parents at that time. Did you feel unsafe? Certainly, anyone who grew up with abusive caretakers or things like that, that's a high question for them. Did you feel like they didn't love you, didn't want you, that am I loved or am I wanted are two of the questions. And um, so for someone with am I good enough, most likely around that time, fourth grade or so, they were probably dealing with some pretty big insecurities in terms of you know, man, I'm and so I'll just, get personal for a second since I already shared my question is, am I good enough? If I think back to fourth, fifth grade, that time in my life, I remember that we moved during that time to a new city, and I transitioned from a private Christian school to a public school. And that transition did not go well.
No.
Um, I did not like being in that environment. I didn't yeah, I didn't feel like I was good enough. I didn't feel like I was one of the cool kids, or I felt like I mean, there were a couple kids that were like bullying me, and just it was not a fun time in my life. And so that's a kind of a big part of how that question was imprinted on me.
Yeah.
So for a client, we would go through that timeline and just we'd look at, okay, where did this happen? What has kind of triggered it since then? Because there's certain life events that, again, just poke it, bring it right back to the surface. And then we would start to look for evidence of the truth.
Yeah.
So one thing our brains do often is when it locks into an idea, especially if it's like a lie, we start to filter out bits of truth that are contrary to that idea that we've locked on. So if you feel like I'm not good enough, you start to forget when you got that award or when your parents actually did say, I'm proud of you. And as I mentioned before, my parents were great. They were awesome. I did hear, I love you, I'm proud of you from them. And so this was certainly not, imprinted, in a large part by them. It was mostly kind of my social experience and just feeling like, man, I was always the smallest kid. Just this puny little kid trying to make friends, but feeling socially awkward and anxious and things like that. And so we would look for evidence of the truth and we would look for actions that someone who believed the truth would take because oftentimes uh, identity influences our actions, but also actions influence our identity. So it's this cycle where, we act like what we believe we are, but you can also choose to act like something that you don't fully believe yet, and your brain will catch up and start believing it. And so we would think of, okay, what would someone who did believe they were good enough do? And it's like, oh, I might, finally publish the book I've been working on, or I might finally launch this thing that I've been, holding back on, or I might apply for this promotion um, that I just don't think I can really get. Things like that. So we'd identify action steps as well as finding those other bits of truth and, trying to lock into God's truth and, and there's a variety of different tools that we can use as well, just to step out in action. Um, but that's kind of a couple things as far as like where we would start with someone who came and sat down in front of me.
Powerful stuff. The things that you were just sharing really go right along in line with the speaker that was at our church. He's a licensed counselor as well, and
Okay.
so has worked with tons of people through many years. Older fellow at this point, but he
Yeah,
made the point of the way that we see the world is primarily set by these two things, our family, like where we came from. So in the Spiro circle, you might say generational,
sure.
blessings or cursing. So if it's bad, it's, from that side, the curse side, or good, it'd be the blessing side. And then your experiences like before 9 or 10. So whatever it was, it may not happen when you're 9 or 10, but usually
Sure.
it gets set in by that time. And
Yeah.
so if you haven't, you know, a lot of us probably by that time wouldn't have had someone like you to come alongside of us and like, hey, you're actually good enough,
Right.
even though your
Right.
parents might try to do their best,
Yeah.
how kids are. They don't always share everything that goes on
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
when they're having
Yeah.
difficulties. So
Absolutely.
yeah, and then the other thing that he kept saying is like everybody is doing the best that they can with what they have. And
Mhm.
so this really affects like how we interact with other people. That same thought I said earlier, like we can't look to other people to fill us
Yeah.
because we don't know even though if we're married to them or their kids,
Hmm.
we don't have the full experience. Only Jesus does. And
Yeah.
so that's why we go to him, and of course we can have other people fill in the blanks. So yeah, this
Right.
is amazing stuff for people to understand. It's really another thing that I thought about is like when people are experiencing these things, it's kind of like the red line, the tachometer. Like when we're
Mm.
having these difficult moments, it's starting to ping that red line. And so
Yeah.
this is the notification for us that something is out of place. There's
Yeah.
something in our engine that's not performing the way it should.
Right.
Need to shift gears or go to the mechanic to figure out what it is. What's one of these questions that may be
Yeah.
popping up that could, if you let it go too far, it's going to blow everything.
Yeah.
Because the thing you said earlier about we've seen this, right? Where someone's very successful in a piece of their life, but something eventually redlines and blows everything up. Like
Right.
it only lasts so long if it's never addressed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. There's plenty of stories out there where, yeah, the CEO's personal life kind of implodes and it comes out like, oh, they actually have this, addiction that nobody knew about, or oh, they just went through a really messy divorce and now, they had to close down their business or something like that. And um, yeah, it's a sad story when you hear that. And so one of my goals for my life is just to make that happen less, help unlock guys, help them heal, help them be the best versions of themselves so that they can go do what they're called to do. Because ultimately, there's billions of us on this planet, and each one of us has awesome gifts and a calling from God and so much that they can offer the world. But the feeling that I get is that a lot of people are kind of sidelined. They're just taken out, by like an injury, using kind of the sports metaphor, taken out by injury or performance anxiety or whatever it is. And so they're just sitting on the bench or they're not fully like walking out their calling. But when we can help people heal and just kind of shake off some of those things, they can do what they're called to do. And so I've always seen myself as kind of like a catalyst or like a connector, like thinking about I don't want to just do what I want to do. I want what I do to unlock other people to do what they can do. And so that's a bit of a complicated way to say that. I've always just felt like that was a calling on my life. And so that's what I'm trying to do here with the coaching now.
That's good stuff. And folks, if you're listening here, you need to connect with Nick, whether you're even if you're maybe not a man, it might be something that Nick can help you out with. But if you're in
Sure.
business uh, and you're wanting to make sure that your heart's in the right space, Nick is a great resource to have. And so we want you to go to the website. Nick, what's the website that people can connect with you with?
So it's soundmindexecutivecoaching.com. Sound mind.
Soundmindexecutivecoaching.com. And there's a
Yeah.
quiz there, it sounds like you guys can fill out, get started.
Yep, kind of right there on the front page. It's
Yeah.
pretty obvious. It's kind of like the entry point, and yeah, it is designed for Christian entrepreneurs and businessmen. Like you said, other people can get value from it too. And I do only coach men, but the counseling practice, we can see anyone through there. And so, although that since that's licensed, that's only for if you're in the state of Ohio. Another thing that I like about the coaching and kind of get out of the box that I can see people from anywhere in the world. Counseling practice, just Ohio.
Yeah. That's good. So we want people to take advantage of that resource. And Nick, we want to get you to give a final encouragement here as we wrap our time up. I've enjoyed our conversation, and there's so much there, right? You said earlier we could go on for hours and hours, like
Yeah.
diving into different parts. And that's why there's executive coaching, so that you can get deep and you can really get to the, questions that need to be answered.
Yeah.
So Nick, throwing it back to you, what's the kind of final encouragement you have for the folks today?
Yeah. Oh man, that's great. There's so many things that I could say. I'll try to speak to each of the primal questions, and maybe just one of them will resonate with each person. But that it's just to say that you are safe, you are secure, you are loved, you are wanted, you are successful, you are good enough, and your life has a purpose. And so that's kind of the, flipping all each of the seven questions into that statement. And so, if any one of those resonated more than the others, just kind of take that, and that could become a personal declaration. I'm a big fan of like writing things out on a note card and like speaking it over your life every day, just classic speaking it out loud so that you can start to believe it. Um, and yeah, I mean, I'm just a big believer in the fact that there's always hope. So, no one is too far gone. Um, we can overcome any situation that you're in. So be blessed.
Wonderful. And Nick, you are good enough, and doggone it, people like you. If you're
Thank you,
old like
Mark.
me, that's a SNL reference. But anyway, I've
Oh,
really
okay.
enjoyed our time together. If you Google
Yeah.
that, doggone it, people like me, you'll see where that comes from. But
Oh,
anyway,
that's good. That's good. Did you say Alf
in a
or
SNL, so it's an old
SNL?
SNL.
SNL. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Classic.
anyway,
Oh, that's
and
good.
that goes for all of you. People, you
Yeah.
all are good enough, and people do like you.
Oh man.
Well, we've enjoyed our time together today. It's been a great
Yeah.
conversation. For folks tuning in, thanks for being a part of the 2000 Cubit Rule, and we will see you next time. Be
All right.
blessed.
Thanks, Mark.